We begin in Wellington with Statistics House and what its failings mean for similar buildings throughout the country. This is an important story because, as we know so terribly from Christchurch, structural and planning failings can cost lives. Now, Statistics House didn't collapse, but if we read from the report released this afternoon, and these are all quotes, there was significant building deformation and structural damage. The north and south end frame beams have elongated and there's permanent frame dilation at both ends of the buildings. Precast floor units have lost their support, units have dropped onto the furniture below them, and there's been significant and widespread cracking to the floors. In other words, this is serious. Nick Smith is Minister for Building and Construction. What does he think of what the report says?
Well, it identifies a flaw in quite a specific type of building design, concrete framed, precast floor slabs, multi-bays, but its performance in the Kaikoura earthquake was unacceptable. It would be likely to have caused serious injury or fatality had the quake been at a time when working hours and the building was occupied. It is true that the Kaikoura earthquake was a big mama. It was an earthquake we'd only expect in Wellington every 50 or 100 years. It was unusually long, but we need to learn the lessons for the design code from this building's lack of performance, change the code and ensure that future buildings are better designed. It's a harsh reminder that our seismologists and structural engineers do not fully understand and have 100% protection against earthquakes. It's about every time a big quake comes along, whether it be Christchurch or Kaikoura, that we learn every lesson possible and further improve the code.
Absolutely, and I think everyone would agree with that, but we agreed with it when your equivalent was saying it in the 70s and 80s, right? And we were learning lessons then, and we redesigned code, and we re-looked at the way we were building buildings, and we are still learning. And I just wonder, at what stage are we going to be able to say to people in Wellington, this really is as good as it can get?
Well, my view is that not in our lifetime will we be able to provide a 100% guarantee of building safety, given the sort of energy release and power that's involved with earthquakes. You know, the Kaikoura earthquake involved a release of energy the equivalent of 800 Hiroshima atomic bombs. These are phenomenal forces. We are a lot safer than what we were with Napier. We're safer again as a consequence of a Nangahu and each earthquake that occurs, but we cannot provide the public with a guarantee of safety, and it will be years of ongoing research in response to quakes of this sort.
Absolutely. All of that is true. And in fact, it just stands to reason. Of course there is going to be an earthquake too big, simply too big. But in this report, and you have referred to it, there are flaws and vulnerabilities that can and arguably should have been avoided.
Well, at the time this building was constructed in 2005, this deficiency was not known about. It has subsequently been found out, and that's why we're making changes to the code. If we compare our seismic design standards internationally, I've got confidence that we're at the cutting edge. There is a particular factor in Wellington with these unusual effects referred to as basin geological effects, where the amplification of the seismic shaking occurs. We are working with our partners in Japan and California on better understanding those, but we still do not fully understand earthquakes to be able to include those in our code at this stage,
absolutely.
And that is why this is an ongoing area of improvement and research.
Okay, let's talk to the ongoing nature of this. What do we know now as a result of this report, as a result of what happened at Statistics House, and how is that going to be implemented? How quickly and how many buildings?
Well, we know from the preliminary report that came out last year that there are about 800 buildings that have some of the same features as Statistics House. We've worked with the Wellington Council, 80 of those buildings, and working through those. The preliminary reports from engineers is only a small number of those have the common features that would require remedial work. Now, outside of Wellington, we do not have the powers to compel building owners to undertake further investigations. That is why in the follow-up to this investigation, I'm asking the Ministry to look at legal review of my Building Act powers. We are asking engineering professionals and councils to look at buildings that have some of these features. But I want to stress, John, these particular features do not pose the greatest risk by any stretch.
No, absolutely, absolutely. It's loose masonry on old buildings. We know that.
But they are the ones that
absolutely. But I want to talk about
where we need to focus our efforts.
Absolutely, but we're talking about statistics, house and similar buildings here, and I want to talk about what you're saying. Are you saying in the Wellington region there are 80 buildings that have similar design features?
Some of the design features.
Okay, and what about outside?
Following up on that.
Right, and the Wellington region's big. We're not just talking the CBD, we're talking right up, right? How far north are we talking?
Well, the specific earthquake legislation we passed just gives us powers in that area where there are follow-up risks of aftershocks from Kaikoura quake.
Okay, what about outside of Wellington? What about, for example, in Christchurch? In other words, what do we know about these buildings? Because if we look at the beam elongation, if we look at the precast floor units, you know, this is quite common design, isn't it, over the past 10, 15, 20 years?
But for a building to have all of the features that Wellington had was unusual, a very long earthquake, and an earthquake with the amplification effects, I am satisfied that this is not one of the larger risks. Yes, we need to prudently follow up on it, but it is not the major issue that we need to focus on improving the earthquake safety of New Zealand's building stock. What we do need to do, though, is make sure that we learn from Statistics House in the building standard so that the new buildings that are being built in Christchurch, the building boom that's occurring in Auckland and elsewhere, have take on board what went wrong with Statistics House.
Building and Construction Minister Nick Smith talking to us shortly before we came on air.